Ever wondered if Jesus marked his relationship status with Judaism as "it's complicated" on his Facebook profile? Well, buckle up because we're about to dive into that tumultuous relationship. Now remember, we're not talking about a high school romance here. We're delving deep into the annals of history, exploring the nuanced bond between a man and his faith set against a canvas of religious and societal shifts. Imagine for a moment you're in the first century. The air is thick with anticipation, with whispers of prophecies and change. And in walks Jesus, a carpenter's son with a message that would reverberate through millennia. But here's the twist. He wasn't here to reject his Jewish heritage. Quite the contrary. Jesus was about as Jewish as they come, from celebrating Passover to affirming his Jewish identity in Matthew 5:17, where he says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Jesus was knee-deep in Jewish culture and traditions. But then why the complications, you ask? Well, that's where their plot thickens. We're going to take you on a journey, from the socio-political landscape of first-century Judea to the teachings of Jesus that aligned with Jewish principles. We'll explore the misunderstandings and conflicts, the moments of tension, and the instances of harmony. We'll contrast quotes, we'll discuss, and we'll ponder. In this exploration, we won't shy away from the tough questions. Did Jesus have beef with the Jewish authorities? Was there a divine statement hidden in his temple tantrums? And most importantly, did Jesus break up with Judaism? Or was it the other way around? So if you're ready for a roller coaster ride through history, grab your popcorn and let's get started, because in the end, relationships are complicated, and the one between Jesus and Judaism was no exception. Think of Moses coming down from the mountain only to realize he missed several hundred years worth of software updates. That's our start point. Now let's hit the rewind button and take a trip back in time. Picture this. We're in the ancient Near East around the 13th century BCE. Moses, a man of humble beginnings, leads the Israelites out of Egypt and becomes the founding father of Judaism. Fast forward a few hundred years to the time of Jesus, and things have changed quite a bit. It's like switching from a stone tablet to an iPhone. Judaism has evolved with new sects and interpretations of the Torah. We have the Pharisees, who are the sticklers for the law, and the Sadducees, the aristocratic elite who run the temple. There are also the Essenes, the original desert hippies, and the Zealots, the rebels with a cause. It's a vibrant, complex world of religious thought, not unlike the diverse array of apps on your smartphone today. Amidst this religious and cultural potpourri, Jesus is born. A Jewish lad from Nazareth, he grows up observing the Sabbath, celebrating Jewish holidays like Passover, and engaging in the rituals of the temple. He's Jewish by birth, by upbringing, by practice. He's more Jewish than a bagel and lox on a Sunday morning. On the socio-political front, the Roman Empire is the new kid on the block, and they're not here for a friendly neighborhood barbecue. They've got their boots on the ground in Judea, and they're calling the shots. Think of them as the overbearing landlord who won't fix the leaky faucet but insists on timely rent. The Pharisees and Sadducees, meanwhile, are like the local neighborhood watch, trying to keep things kosher while navigating the Roman occupation. It's a delicate balancing act, like trying to walk a tightrope while juggling flaming torches. Now let's delve into the Gospels, our primary source of information about Jesus. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, "Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." This statement is as clear an affirmation of his Jewish identity as him saying, "Yes, I'd like my bagel toasted with a smear of cream cheese, please." Jesus wasn't here to scrap the Torah or toss out the teachings of Moses. He was here to fulfill them, to bring them to fruition. He was like a software developer who doesn't discard the old code, but builds upon it, refines it, and makes it better. In another instance, we see Jesus celebrating Passover, one of the most important Jewish festivals. He's there with his disciples, breaking bread, drinking wine, and having a good old-fashioned sir. This isn't some rogue outsider rejecting his faith. This is a devout Jew participating in one of the pillars of Jewish tradition. So you see, Jesus wasn't just a guy with a knack for parables. He was deeply rooted in Judaism. His teachings, his actions, his life, they were all steeped in the Jewish faith. He didn't reject Judaism. He embraced it, grappled with it, and sought to fulfill its highest ideals. To understand Jesus, we must first understand his Jewishness. And to do that, we need to delve deeper into the world he lived in, the faith he practiced, and the teachings he left behind. Stay tuned as we continue this journey exploring the complex relationship between Jesus and Judaism. Up next is the love story phase, when Jesus met Judaism, or should we say when Jesus, the Jewish rabbi, took Judaism to a whole new level. Stay with us because things are about to get interesting. Imagine Jesus doing a TED Talk on a mount, laying down some serious wisdom. It's not too far from the truth. Let's dive into the love story between Jesus and Judaism. Picture Jesus not as the figurehead of a new religion, but as a Jewish rabbi interpreting and teaching the Torah. He's not just doing this in the synagogues, but out in the open around campfires, in fields, on boats, and yes, even on mountains. This is where we find the heart of Jesus' teachings, the Sermon on the Mount, where he lays down the Beatitudes, a set of 8 blessings that echo the core principles of Judaism. Blessed are the meek, the merciful, the pure in heart, the peacemakers. These aren't radical departures from the Jewish faith. They are extensions of it. In fact, Jesus' teachings are often in close alignment with core Jewish principles. Take the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is a universal principle found in many religions, but in Judaism it's expressed in the Torah: love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus was essentially remixing the Torah, giving it a fresh beat for a new generation. But it wasn't always smooth sailing for Rabbi Jesus. There were misunderstandings and conflicts, like the time he flipped tables at the temple. Was it a bad day at the market, or a divine statement? In truth, it was a critique of the commercialization of faith, something that Jesus, in his Jewish wisdom, took issue with. And then there were the Pharisees, the local neighborhood watch of Judea, who were often on the receiving end of Jesus' sharp tongue. But it's essential to understand that Jesus' critique was not a rejection of Judaism, but a call for authenticity and integrity within the faith. Now let's play a game of quote comparison. Consider this statement from Jesus: "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now compare it with this quote from the Jewish text, the Talmud: "The place where repentant sinners stand is a place where even the perfectly righteous cannot stand." Do you see the parallels? Both quotes emphasize humility, repentance, and the transformative power of faith. It's like Jesus was giving a masterclass on Judaism with a few twists and turns to keep things interesting. At times it seemed like Jesus was pushing the envelope, challenging the norms and shaking up the status quo. But remember, the best love stories are never straightforward. They have their ups and downs, their twists and turns. And the love story between Jesus and Judaism is no exception. Jesus' teachings were often provocative, challenging, even controversial, but they were rooted in the Jewish tradition. He was not rejecting Judaism, he was reinterpreting it, reimagining it, reigniting it for a new era. However, it's important to note that while Jesus was in sync with Jewish principles, he did have issues with the religious institutions of his time. It's a classic case of it's not you, it's your institutions. But we'll delve into that in the next segment. Now let's circle back to our initial analogy of Jesus giving a TED Talk on a mount. We might laugh at the image, but it's not far off. Jesus was a master communicator, a storyteller, a teacher. He used parables, stories that packed a moral punch to convey complex spiritual truths. And guess what? This method was typical of Jewish rabbis of his time. So did Jesus have a complicated relationship with Judaism? Sure, he did. But it wasn't a rejection, it was a reformation, a reimagining, a revitalization. He was challenging the norms, pushing the boundaries, stirring the pot. But he was doing it as a Jew within the Jewish tradition. To sum it up, Jesus may have ruffled a few feathers, sparked a few debates, even flipped a few tables. But at the heart of it all, he was a Jewish rabbi, teaching Jewish principles in a way that resonated with the people of his time. Jesus may have stirred the pot, but much of what he said was in line with his Jewish heritage. Ever had a disagreement with your significant other over their friends? Well, Jesus had issues with the Pharisees and Sadducees. Just like any great story, our tale of Jesus and Judaism has its share of conflict. But before we dive into the murky waters of religious disagreements, let's set the stage. Picture this, it's the 1st century, and you're in Judea, the Roman Empire's latest real estate acquisition. It's a bustling scene. The local marketplace is alive with the chatter of traders, the air rich with the scent of spices and fresh bread. But there's tension too, a simmering pot of political and religious unrest, ready to boil over at any moment. At the center of this pandemonium, we find Jesus, a charismatic leader making waves with his teachings. But here's the twist. Jesus was Jewish, and he wasn't trying to start a new religion. In fact, he said he came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And yet his teachings often clashed with those of the Pharisees and Sadducees, the religious leaders of the time. So what was the issue? Well, it's complicated. Imagine you're at a family dinner and you start questioning some of the long-held traditions. You're not criticizing the family, you just think some of the traditions could use a little update. That's essentially what Jesus was doing. He wasn't rejecting Judaism, he was challenging the practices of its institutions. Now, let's talk about the Pharisees and Sadducees. Think of them as the religious upper crust of Judean society. They were the keepers of the law, the arbiters of all things holy. But Jesus saw them as hypocrites, more interested in the letter of the law than its spirit. He didn't mince words either. In Matthew 23, he calls them out, saying, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence." Ouch, talk about a roast. But it wasn't all fire and brimstone. Jesus also showed compassion for the ordinary folks, those who were often at the rough end of these religious laws. He healed on the Sabbath, forgave sinners, and even saved a woman from being stoned to death. All actions that went against the institutional norms. So, where did it all go wrong? Well, the religious authorities weren't too thrilled about Jesus' popularity or his critique of their practices. And it didn't help that Jesus was hailed as the Messiah, the promised savior of the Jewish people. The tension escalated, leading to that fateful day when Jesus, in a fit of righteous anger, overturned the tables in the temple, accusing the traders of turning a house of prayer into a den of robbers. It was the final straw. From then on, the religious leaders were out to get Jesus. They plotted, they schemed, and eventually they handed him over to the Roman authorities, accusing him of claiming to be the king of the Jews, a direct challenge to Roman rule. The rest, as they say, is history, but let's not forget the context. These were troubled times, and the Jewish leaders were under immense pressure to maintain peace and order. They were stuck between a rock and a hard place, the Roman authorities on one side and a disgruntled populace on the other. It's easy to judge with the benefit of hindsight, but their actions were driven by a desperate need for survival. So, what's the takeaway from all this? Well, it's clear that Jesus didn't reject Judaism. He was born a Jew, lived as a Jew, and died as a Jew. His teachings were steeped in Jewish thought and tradition, but he did challenge the practices of the religious institutions, urging them to focus more on the spirit of the law rather than its letter. In the end, it wasn't Judaism Jesus had a problem with, but the practices of its institutions. Imagine Judaism going through a massive rebranding after its breakup with Jesus. It's like when your favorite band splits up and the lead singer launches a solo career. You're left wondering, what's next for the band? Will the drummer take the lead, or are they going to hire a new frontman? This was the situation with Judaism in the aftermath of the Second Temple's destruction in 70 AD. Now Judaism had to navigate without its central place of worship. It was like a ship without a compass, a band without a lead singer. And it was in these turbulent times that the religion underwent what could be described as a software update. The focus shifted from temple rituals to a more decentralized model. Synagogues and local communities came to the forefront, and the study of Torah and prayer became the new pillars of worship. It was akin to the band deciding to produce more acoustic and folk music after their electric guitar virtuoso left. Meanwhile, on the other side of the breakup, Jesus' followers were also finding their footing. They were like a fledgling startup, navigating the challenges of their new faith. They had the vision, the passion, and the charismatic leader, but they were up against established businesses, so to speak. It wasn't easy, but they were determined to make it work. As the years rolled on, these followers, initially a small Jewish sect, began to distinguish themselves. They adopted new symbols, rituals, and even a new name, Christians. It's as if the lead singer's solo project, initially similar to the band's original sound, gradually started to carve out its own distinct genre. There were disagreements and debates, of course. Do we keep the old band's logo, or do we design a new one? Do we stick to the original fan base, or do we try to reach a broader audience? In the case of the early Christians, these questions translated into theological and practical dilemmas. Should they adhere strictly to Jewish laws, or should they relax some rules to welcome non-Jews into the fold? The decision to open the doors to Gentiles, non-Jews, was a game changer. It was like the solo artist deciding to experiment with a new sound and winning a Grammy for it. Suddenly, Christianity was not just a small Jewish sect anymore, it was becoming a global phenomenon. And so, in the aftermath of their breakup, both Judaism and Christianity underwent significant transformations. They had to redefine their identities, their practices, and their boundaries. It's as if they'd both asked themselves, who are we without the other? And in answering that question, they discovered new strengths, new directions, and new paths to growth. Of course, the paths of Judaism and Christianity would continue to intersect and diverge throughout history. There were times of harmony and times of discord, much like two ex-band members occasionally jamming together on stage or throwing shade at each other in interviews. But through it all, they remained indelibly linked, each carrying a part of the other. And thus two of the world's major religions took shape, each carrying a part of the other. It's a fascinating story, isn't it? A tale of transformation, resilience, and reinvention, all set against the backdrop of tumultuous historical changes. It's a reminder that nothing exists in isolation, that we are all products of our past, and that even the most significant shifts are often the result of a series of small, incremental changes. It's like the evolution of music, from classical to rock and roll, from vinyl records to streaming services. Each step is a response to what came before, and a precursor to what's yet to come. So, the next time you find yourself in the middle of a change, remember the story of Judaism and Christianity. Remember that it's okay to redefine yourself, to question old practices, and to forge new paths. And remember that sometimes a breakup is just the beginning of a new and exciting journey, and thus two of the world's major religions took shape, each carrying a part of the other. Well, folks, it's been quite a journey, hasn't it? We've trekked through the annals of history, navigated the tumultuous waters of religion, and even dabbled in a bit of relationship counseling, all to explore one question: did Jesus reject Judaism? But let's face it, we're not dealing with a simple yes or no question here. It's more like trying to pick out a movie on a Saturday night when you and your partner have drastically different tastes. So did Jesus reject Judaism? In short, no, he didn't. But as we've seen, it's a bit more nuanced than that. Think back to scene 2, where we painted a picture of Jesus' era. The Roman Empire was the overbearing landlord, the Pharisees and Sadducees were the neighborhood watch, and Jesus was the revolutionary tenant stirring up the status quo. We took a deep dive into the Gospels and found plenty of evidence that Jesus was, in fact, very much Jewish. Remember that quote from Matthew 5:17, where Jesus says he came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it? That's about as Jewish as you can get. But then we hit scene 3, where we saw that love story between Jesus and Judaism start to hit some rocky patches. Jesus' teachings were steeped in Jewish principles, but his run-ins with the religious authorities were more like a divine game of table tennis than a peaceful theological discussion. Fast forward to scene 4, and we found ourselves in the thick of a breakup. But this wasn't a rejection of Judaism as a faith. No, this was Jesus taking issue with the institutions and leadership of the time. It was less, "I don't love you anymore," and more, "I can't stand your friends." Finally, in scene 5, we explored the aftermath. Judaism went through a major software update after the destruction of the Second Temple, while Christianity was booting up on a separate system. But remember, this wasn't a hard split. It was more like a family tree branching out into different directions. So, what's the takeaway from all this? Jesus didn't reject Judaism. He had a bone to pick with the institutions and the leadership, but he never walked away from his Jewish roots, and that's an important distinction to make. These discussions aren't just about historical facts or theological debates. They're about understanding the complex tapestry that is our shared religious history. They're about promoting dialogue, encouraging empathy, and fostering a sense of shared humanity. So the next time you find yourself pondering over religious software updates or divine relationship statuses, remember our little journey through history, and who knows, maybe it'll spark a conversation or two. If you enjoyed our historical drama, don't forget to share your thoughts on social media. On Instagram at Christianity.unmasked, we're also on X at Christiani82002, as well as Facebook and YouTube. And remember, in the grand scheme of things, we're all just trying to update our religious software. Until next time.